Welcome everybody. I'm Nanci Belle and I'm very excited to be talking to you today. Apparently we have quite a few people that have joined us in the thousands, and I'm very happy about that because I have a story to tell you. And the story is about Lindamood-Bell and how we have been able to change literally thousands of lives since we started 30 years ago. In fact, Pat Lindamood and I founded Lindamood-Bell 30 years ago, or almost 30 years ago, with a belief in ourselves and a belief in you. We actually did really believe that we could do anything, and we believed the same about you. We believed you could do anything. And we knew then that we had to do something big because there was a big challenge. And that challenge was the amount of stories that we were told, and the parents that came to us to talk to us about the frustration that they had and that their children had in learning how to read. If we think of going through school like this, the beginning of school, either kindergarten or first grade, and all the way through grade 12 or year 12, the parents that we talked to were coming to us because their children were falling off of that K-12 pipeline. They had children that had difficulty learning to read, children that had been diagnosed as dyslexic, children that had spent years and years in special education. At the end of, say, 7th or 8th grade, were still in special education and not able to learn how to read. Teachers that came to us and asked us for help in trying to make a difference for a child that they had not been able to teach despite their passion and their desire to use as many reading programs as were available to them. So all in all, what we saw over and over was a lack of success in school, sometimes not with a label of ADHD, sometimes with a label of ADHD or ADD or dyslexia or hyperlexia or autism. But overall, what we saw and still do is a loss of confidence in those individuals that have a loss of confidence in themselves, and tragically a loss of potential. We believed that didn't have to be that way. We believed it then, and we believe it now. We researched and we wrote programs. We wrote more programs in our story. We researched more and we learned more. And I wanted to put this out there for us to talk about because one of the things that we learned is that the brain can only receive information from our senses. This is something that Pat wrote in 2006. It's a multisensory organ, but it can only receive information from the senses. And the brain is able to make sensory language connections that are the key to learning how to read. She says here, intervention research reveals establishing sensory language connections is the key to establishing those aspects of multisensory integration which individuals do not access genetically. So the message here, and for the rest of our talk, is the sensory input of imagery is a primary sensory cognitive function. Let me underline that for you. Sensory cognitive function for reading and language comprehension. My story is going to be about the cause and the solution and some video testimony and some research when we're done. So here's the first video that I want to show you, that not everyone can easily access the sensory input of imagery.
We have a second grader going into third grade, and our story began at the beginning of second grade. Garrett couldn't read, and we have had very good schools, good teachers. We take him to the library, we read to him, and yet we had a second grader that couldn't read. There was a ton of guesswork. He would look at a book and he would start to read, and when it came to a word that he didn't know, he would just fill it in. Any word that started with an A. He wouldn't even approach sounding it out because he didn't know how to do that. I would ask him, Garrett, what did you do during reading time in class? What do you do? And he said, I just look at the pictures. I just look at the pictures, and kind of use his imagination. He wasn't reading. He had specific learning disability, which when I went home, I Googled, and it was kind of code for dyslexia.
We knew that there were some issues with reading comprehension at an early age, and we had tutors, and she's really smart. She always compensated. She did well. If there was a great teacher, she would listen to everything they said, and she was learning multimodally. When the rigors of the class got harder and it was more based on reading, and maybe she had teachers that weren't as invested in teaching and said, we'll watch this movie, go home and read the book, it just became overwhelming. She couldn't keep up. So she would show us the A's on the things based on a teacher's instruction. But then the quiz or the homework assignments that were based on doing it on your own, going home and reading, she was failing. To say the least, we were shocked. We had no idea that it was as bad as it was until the report card came home. She brought her report card home and she was failing classes. We actually moved her from honors classes and AP to on level, thinking, okay, it's her junior year. College is coming up. We really want her to excel. We want her to get A's, so we'll move her to on level. What we thought was going to be her spectacular star year ended up being the year where the bottom fell out.
Now what we know is that a lot of those children that I showed you and talked to you about, the parents that came to us, most all of them had some weakness in processing the sensory input of imagery. However, that doesn't have to be. There is a cause and there's a solution. First, I want you to understand, I'm going to go through this quickly, simplicity of reading. Reading is not complicated. It's not rocket science. There are certain components of reading that are critical for us to become global readers. And that is, this is how I think of it anyhow, that there's an auditory circle that's for phonological processing and word attack. So that's being able to sound out words. There's a visual circle that's orthographic processing and recognizing words. And all of that put together for being able to read in context and use your vocabulary. However, as important as these circles are, they're not the end-all, be-all. They're not the outcome for reading. The outcome for reading is comprehension. Second, I want you to understand that the language processing spectrum, that reading, you can have, I want you to think of it like this: reading words, decoding, and reading comprehension. There are students that can have weak decoding that becomes weak enough that they're given a label of dyslexia. And then there are students that can have weak comprehension that the weakness becomes so severe that the students can be labeled hyperlexic or autistic. This spectrum means that there will be some children that would only have weakness on that side of the spectrum, and some children that would only have weakness in reading comprehension. So reading comprehension would be that circle. These inner circles would be for decoding. Now, what would be the cause? And that's the next slide. What is the cause of that weakness? And that is imagery. But imagery is not just imagery. There are two types of imagery: parts and wholes. So the parts that you're able to image would be your ability to create mental representations or imagery for sounds and letters in words. So for example, if I put this out there and then magically erase it, if I ask you what was the second letter that you saw, you would access your symbol imagery and tell me that it was the L. If I asked you to read those letters that you saw backwards, you would go P-I-L-S, and you're accessing symbol imagery. So symbol imagery is related to your ability to decode both word attack skills and word recognition skills. We have a lot of research to back up that statement. Concept imagery is the other side of the spectrum. That's this one over here. Concept imagery is the ability to create mental representations for language that you hear or language that you read. And it is a completely, in my opinion, a completely different type of imagery than symbol imagery. For example, if I said to you, I guess the example that I often use is, and I want you to picture this, the white horse jumped over the rock wall and ran across the green grass. If you have good concept imagery, you can create mental representations, not for the words, but for the concepts that were presented to you. The white horse, the rock wall, him jumping over the rock wall and onto the green grass. Once you know about the simplicity of the reading circles, and it can be on a spectrum, then the third thing you have to do in order to develop skills in reading and comprehension and enable someone to be more successful in school, the third thing you have to do is identify strengths and weaknesses. So we have students do a diagnostic evaluation. I'm going to take you back for a second. What we're trying to do, or what we're doing in that evaluation, is identifying, let me get these out of here for you, is identifying, is your child this child? Is your child this child? Is your child a combination? Where's the weakness? Is your child weak here? Is your child weak here? Etc. So when we go through the evaluation, we look at, it's about a 4-hour evaluation, we look at ability to follow directions, oral vocabulary, ability to sound out words, ability to read words in context, in paragraphs, etc. So I've included a couple of examples for you. This is a young man named Sam, who is 11 years, 3 months in the 6th grade, and here's your circles that you now know about. His oral vocabulary is at the 75th percentile, and a way for you to think about percentiles is they go 1st percentile to 99th. And so the 75th percentile, if this is a 50th, the 75th percentile is indicating that Sam has an area of strength in oral vocabulary. Now, if you look at his word attack skills, however, they're significantly below his oral vocabulary. If you look at his word recognition skills, they're even farther below. So his word attack is the 37th percentile. His word recognition is the 25th percentile. And if we now come down and look at him reading in paragraphs, his paragraph reading is at the 25th percentile. Yet he's able to comprehend, if he reads just enough, he's able to comprehend what he reads. So you can see in looking at Sam's profile, I can say to you that his weakness is in symbol imagery, and it's primarily in these circles. If we look at Ella, she was, and back up for just a second, I want to tell you that when Sam came to us, he had lots and lots of different reading programs that had already been done with him, and he, by this time, had been labeled dyslexic and ADHD. And then if I turn to Ella was a little different than Sam in that close to the same age, same grade, but look at how different her profile is. She was labeled not as dyslexic, not as experiencing ADHD, the symptoms of ADHD or autism, she was just simply labeled as not paying attention and not trying. And if you look at her percentiles and her profile, obviously she's significantly up in ability to sound out a word and oral vocabulary, word recognition. So this is really strong. This is really, really, really strong. If we take a look at her paragraph reading, go down here, look how high those are. Really, really strong. But when we start to look at anything related to comprehension, such as following oral directions and reading comprehension, there's where her weakness is. She is exactly flip-flop from Sam. And I decided I was going to put one more slide in here because this is a child that I did work with on the East Coast. Matt had learned to read words at a very early age. He, at that time, was labeled hyperlexic and then now later diagnosed as on the autistic spectrum. So he was diagnosed as having an autistic spectrum disorder. Look at his profile. Oral vocabulary, right in the middle, absolutely adequate. Very high in word attack, very high in word recognition. Let's drop down to looking at reading still. Very high in reading fluency and accuracy. Look how low his word recognition was and how low his ability to follow oral directions. So you can see that his strength, just like Sam, is in the outer circles, but not the big circle of language comprehension. So once you've made an accurate diagnosis, the fourth thing is to receive appropriate intervention to develop the sensory input of imagery. And I want you to see a little bit of that on video so that you can see what it's like for these children to at least be in a learning center. You won't see us doing the intervention, but you'll see, I think, the energy, and you'll see a child writing some letters in the air to develop symbol imagery. I want to say to you passionately that we believe that each individual can learn to his or her potential. And so now what I would like for you to see is a little bit of video of our clinicians and consultants and directors in our now 64 learning centers across the United States and Australia, London. We have some in Asia also. I want you to hear what they have to say, because I think that you'll recognize that they believe like we believed 30 years ago in these students.
I think about a student named Chris that I worked with one of my first summers as a clinician. He was a high school student, and his self-confidence was so shot that he would walk down the hallway hunched over and leaning against the wall, almost using it for support as he went. By the end of that summer, Chris was reading at a 4th grade level. He was independently decoding words and recognizing sight words, which was more than he had ever done before. He went from being a non-reader in the course of a summer to being able to read almost anything we put in front of him. And we were having one of our last sessions together, and he came to the word elevator and he couldn't read it. So I wrote it on a separate sheet of paper, and I asked him to use his breaking rules, which he did beautifully and independently. And I burst into tears, and lucky for me, the session was almost over, because he got up, he kind of looked at me funny and got up and left the session. And when he left, I grabbed the piece of paper with the word on it that he had broken up, and it sat on my desk ever since then. So for more than 12 or 15 years, it's sat on my desk because I wanted a constant daily reminder of kids like Chris, because we get to change the world for students one word at a time and one student at a time. So I'm glad that we get to be on this journey together.
My favorite part of working here is being able to watch students go from having no confidence and a very negative outlook towards school or learning to being excited about finishing their very first book or running in to share grades from a recent testing or report card. Every day, I interact with students and families looking for learning solutions.
The why for me started in my first year, 15 years ago, seeing this young man, one of the first students I paced, who came to us believing and verbalizing that he felt like he was stupid, that he didn't fit in, etc. And I saw that self-esteem start to slowly increase as his success increased, and at the end of it, we saw great scores, great changes, but more importantly, saw him start to believe differently about himself and how he interacted and carried himself with the world. And just last year saw that he's graduated top of his class from the University of Alabama in finance and all this kind of stuff, and became the king of the Mardi Gras parade. So he has quite literally flourished over the course of the years, and I know that we had a hefty hand in that, and that's the privilege and the luck that we have to be doing what we do, and that's my why.
What makes Lindamood-Bell unique is that we don't give up on our students and our clients. We're going to find the problem. We have the right assessment. We have the right programs, and we are going to help our students and our families reach their goals. It's incredibly rewarding. You may come to Lindamood-Bell thinking that you just want to help people, but it's so much more. You're going to learn how to make the connection between imagery and language and help these people learn how to read and comprehend to their potential, and it simply changes lives.
I'm thinking of a couple memorable students that I've worked with, and they've both been adults. And the common piece that they shared, they walked in thinking that there was no hope. There was no hope. They weren't going to read, and that's something that they thought they would have to face. But then in such a short period of time, they were able to develop skills that truly changed their life. I mean, imagine not being able to read the New York Times and remember what you read, and you can't share, what you read with coworkers around the office, and then 7 weeks later, you're able to process information. I mean, it changes way more than being able to open that newspaper and remembering what you read. It can really change lives. Maybe you don't know it, but you want to change a life.
As great as that is, now I want to share with you some research. We have, in our Lindamood-Bell Learning Centers, we have worked with thousands and thousands of individuals of all ages and varying degrees of strengths and weaknesses. Some that have come to us with prior labels. Most of the children that we see and adults have had some form of intervention before they come to us. And some of the children that we work with have no prior diagnosis, no prior labels. They're just not perhaps performing to their potential in school, or they're frustrated. So first thing I want to show you is just a very quick slide of what happens when we develop imagery, the symbol imagery part of what we do for decoding. This is on average of 100 hours, only 100 hours of instruction. We see students intensively, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and the goal is to get in and get out so that they can begin to change that projection quickly, so that we can change the rate very quickly, say if it's a 3rd or a 4th grade student. You can look at that and see that. Let me erase this for a second. On the average, the standard score changes were extremely large for word attack, word rec, paragraph reading accuracy, and fluency. And once we get them reading, then we also got this tremendous change in comprehension.
I wanted the best help for Garrett, and so I started researching tutors and schools, private schools, and ultimately I knew that we had to have one-on-one instruction for him to excel and get through school. So we decided to dedicate our summer to coming to Lindamood-Bell. I thought it was going to be a big struggle to get him to go to school during the summer, but actually with the rotation of teachers, like every hour, he's happy. Our best experience with Lindamood-Bell was that it gave him the tools to get by in everyday life, just reading signs, reading books. And they actually said, once Garrett goes through the program, he is going to have tools for his life. He can go to private school if you want to. He can go to public school. It's your choice. You didn't have to cater to around his dyslexia. He could do anything he wanted to. He is confident. That's what I was really worried about, that he was going to, as he was getting older, he was going to really stand out and realize that he was a lot farther behind than his peers. So now that he has learned how to approach words and break them up and chunk them up, he's able to, he's confident, which you can't buy that. Like, that took a long process of him being nurtured into becoming a confident child, which is what every parent wants. And going on to 3rd grade, oh my goodness, I feel so good. And he feels so good that he can do it, which I was really sweating for a long time of, how are you going to be able to handle so much workload on your own? And now I know that he knows how to get through it.
Now, if we look at our comprehension students, where we're developing their concept imagery, this is after 99 hours of instruction. This is looking at their comprehension, their oral directions, and their vocabulary. You can see on this slide, and I'm going to take just a little bit of time to explain this to you, this is pre- and post-test percentiles. These students came in at the 25th percentile in reading comprehension. I have other slides that I could show you that they started at the 80th, 75th percentile in word recognition and word attack and paragraph reading, but their comprehension was significantly impaired, or significantly below that. And after 99 hours, their comprehension went from the 25th percentile to the 47th percentile. All the tests that we use are nationally normed tests, are not our tests. They're nationally normed tests. So this is extremely significant information for you to absorb. Their ability to follow oral directions changed from the 14th to the 30th, and I'm happy to say that their oral vocabulary changed also to the 47th percentile. But one of the things that I want to show you is the comprehension-only students that we have, that they didn't need any decoding help, that we identified as severe weakness. That means that their pre-test percentile was at the 8th percentile. So remember how to think about percentiles. They go 1st to 99th. 50th is in the middle. 25th and 75th is considered normal range. The 8th percentile puts these students way down there. And their word opposites, their vocabulary, however, and their word recognition and their word attack skills were all very high, but their oral vocabulary was at the 34th percentile. So if you have word recognition and word attack skills that are high and your oral vocabulary is at the 34th percentile, this is a significant impairment. And this is where they went to after 102 hours of instruction. And I hope you're gasping, because every time I see it, I gasp. That's life-changing, that's for sure.
I have to say, a psychologist said, call Lindamood-Bell, talk to them, and get her assessed. And of all the places in my panic that I called, Lindamood-Bell was the first person who called me back. And this first interaction with them, it's been stellar. Okay, you have a child who has a specific issue that reading comprehension is a problem. Her reading vocabulary is above grade level. Her reading fluency, her ability to read the words on the page, was above grade level. But her comprehension, when she was reading, she wasn't forming pictures or movies in her mind, so she couldn't retain. There was no ability to understand. She'd go through 5 pages and wouldn't know what she was reading. So he said, we can help you. She started coming and doing their verbalizing and visualization program. But Lindamood-Bell trained her how to read, trained her how to make those visualizations. And she was just retested after 5 months, and she went up like 40 percentage points on, it was just amazing. And through the successes here, she's our Sydney again. She's bright, she's excited. She loves the people here also, which helps. But she feels great about herself. I will tell you, 6 months ago, I really thought, what are we going to do? It's just not going to work. How can she go to college? And absolutely she'll go to college and she'll excel in college. Because she couldn't wait to get here. And oh my gosh, I have Lindamood-Bell tomorrow. She loves it, and she loves learning, which, what more could I ask for? This has been the best thing that has happened to her and to our family, in that they brought her Sydney back, and she's happy, and she's going to succeed, and she knows how smart she is. She is smart. She just couldn't visualize and verbalize and visualize, and had the difficulty conceptualizing reading.
We also have conducted, and this is the very last thing that I want to talk to you about, we also have conducted neurological research, and two of them have been published. This one is at Georgetown University, the Center for the Study of Learning. This was with children that had been labeled dyslexic, and what we found was that after doing the symbol imagery instruction in this randomized controlled study, 11 children that were identified as dyslexic, and then we had that was the experimental group, and the control group had normal function, or were developing normally. After 8 weeks or 160 hours, the SI students showed statistically significant improvement in phoneme awareness, symbol imagery, word recognition, rapid automatized naming, word attack, and passage comprehension. But most exciting for us is that those improvements in reading ability were accompanied by changes in brain structure that maintained after the intervention. 4 areas of brain structure showed increased volume. This is such a big deal at the end of the intervention, and those areas included memory and mental imagery, areas in the brain that were involved in memory and mental imagery. And this slide shows you, here's test 1, here's test 2, and you can see the changes in those 4 areas of the brain. But look at what happens when there's no intervention. No intervention here during this period, and they still increased. Very exciting, very, very exciting to us. And then the most recent neurological research that we have done is at the University, or with the University of Alabama at Birmingham. This is a paper that has just been published in Human Brain Mapping, and its title is Changes in Intrinsic Connectivity of the Brain's Reading Network Following Intervention in Children with Autism. There's an underconnectivity hypothesis that I want to take just a moment to talk to you about. Dr. Khanna and others, and Dr. Khanna was Rajesh Khanna at UAB, is who headed the study, and others, Dr. Khanna and others, examined the neurobiology of cognitive and language comprehension deficits found in individuals with autism. And here's what they noted. Individuals identified with ASD have an impaired ability to communicate from one cortical area of the brain to the other. In this study, we examined the impact of VV on brain responses in children identified with ASD. We had 16 ASD students and 15 control, ages 8 through 11. We did 10 weeks of VV, only 10 weeks, at about 200 hours. And this is what the paper says. The subjects receiving VV exhibited significantly greater brain connectivity. This is Broca's area. And this is what happened in 10 weeks. You can see the change from before to after. It's very exciting. The VV subjects also had significantly improved changes, or had significant improvement in language comprehension. And this is what they say in the paper. The results of this study illustrate that instruction in the visualizing verbalizing program leads to greater brain connectivity and improved comprehension for children with autism spectrum disorders. And here's how we feel about that. The imagery-language connection is the foundation for processing language. We believe that the sensory input of imagery can be developed, stimulated and developed and established for reading and language comprehension, also including math. And what I wanted to say to you in this slide is that we believe in your dreams, and together, just like we thought a long time ago, together we can do anything. Thanks so much.